All right, we're official now. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining us from. Thank you for attending today's fireside chat webinar, Building Real Sustainable Supply Chains. Today we'll be talking with Dr. Wesley Hersche, and we're going to discuss what it actually takes to move from emissions data into real operational change. My name is Colin Connors. I'll be moderating and speaking with Dr. Hirsch. I'm a strategic advisor, global partnerships executive specializing in climate tech and global sustainability initiatives. I partner with Breed Zero, and they're a specialized AI agent created to help companies effortlessly decarbonize their entire value chains, and so much more. But today I have the privilege of speaking with Dr. Wesley Hirsch. Dr. Hirsch is a director of energy and sustainability solutions at Prologis. Prologis is the world's leader and owner, operator, and developer of logistics real estate. Dr. Hirsch is responsible for driving the sustainability and decarbonization strategies for both Prologis and their customers. His efforts and knowledge are keys for Prologis's net zero goals, as well as helping customers to optimize efficiency, resiliency, and sustainability in their goals as well. His extensive resume, he has multiple leadership roles with global conglomerates, U.S. agencies. He's done research, analysis, consulting, advisory roles throughout the U.S. and around the world. Dr. Hirsch has an incredible background, vast wisdom, knowledge, experience, and incredible insights. And I'm excited to jump in and hear directly from him. So, welcome, Wesley, and thank you for joining us today. And, please just, a little introduction, say hello to the crowd before we
Sure.
dive in, and let's try to have some fun, be informative.
Yeah.
One housekeeping note, there is a section for those in attendance to submit questions. And we're going to try to save them for the end. However, we'll be moderating them as they come in. And if something seems like it fits in right then and there, we'll try to get it in there and hear from Wes and see what he has to say. So thank you all for joining, and most importantly, thank you Wes for being here.
Yeah. Thanks, Colin. That's quite an introduction. I appreciate it. I don't know what else I'd add to that. Yeah. So I started life as a career life, I should say, not life, as a senior intelligence officer for the U.S. government. I lived in a lot of different places in the world. I was deployed to Iraq for a while, lived in London and worked out of the U.S. Embassy there, and then in Tokyo, somewhere there and at Yokota Air Base. And yeah, about 2009, actually, 2009, 2010, my deployment to Iraq, I know I wanted to transition to a career in sustainability. I'd always been involved in energy. And then, yeah, I think you covered it from there. Worked for a number of different companies. And for the last almost year and a half now, I've been at Prologis, the world's largest logistics real estate company. And yeah, it's been great. We get to deliver a lot for the customers, which are the tenants that are inside our buildings. We'll probably dive into that into the questions here. But yeah, excited to talk to you and the folks that joined on the webinar. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, one quick question I have for you. How do you get the title doctor? How'd you stumble upon that?
Yeah, a lot of pain and suffering. No, it's good. I did my doctorate, my PhD at Arizona State University. I often get asked this. They say, I did a PhD in sustainability, and they're like, yeah, but what is it in? I'm like, nope, in sustainability at the world's first school of sustainability, which has been around, I think, longer than people realize. It's been around for almost 20 years at Arizona State University. I actually worked at Arizona State University for a number of years as well as a research director and helped build a research institute there.
Mhm.
And so I've worked sort of in academia and had a couple publications. I think I was a better sort of operator and account manager than I was maybe an academic. So I did do some publications, but yeah, looking more at sort of impact in the types of work I'm doing now. But yeah,
Awesome.
so
Was
then
there
when you
one
do
per
that, you get to be a
Yeah,
doctor after that. But yeah, feel free
there
to
you
call me
go.
Wes. So yeah.
Yeah, was there one particular thing that made you say, "Hey, I want to look into sustainability," and then that got you going in that direction, or how many?
Yeah,
PhD in
kind of like
sustainability,
without.
especially back then, was, it wasn't the cool thing to do back then, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, without giving you my full life story, I had a couple things that were probably serendipitous. So, I was born on Earth Day, 50 years ago. So that was interesting. So I'd always sort of been and had typical to most people that work in sustainability had sort of had a love of nature and the outdoors and camped a lot when I was a kid, etc. But then I worked a lot. My first degree of my undergrad was in geography and geographic information systems, and then the agency I went and worked for the U.S. government is the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. So it's a mouthful. It's called NGA for short, or USNGA. But they're the mapping and satellite imagery agency. When I was deployed to Iraq, so I'd been working for them, deployed or stationed at U.S. Transcom for a while. That's U.S. Transportation Command. So I was looking a lot at energy logistics and that type of operations. A couple other places in St. Louis and other activities I was doing. And then ultimately deployed to Iraq in 2009 and 2010. That was right after I became a father. And that was, I think, the moment for me. For those that don't know, this is a bit of departure, I think, from what we're going to talk about, but just so it's known, in that theater of operations, for every 1 gallon of gas, gasoline, petrol, whatever you call it, or 1 liter, whatever that was burned at an actual, use, it took 20 to get that gallon or to get that liter there. It's a 20-to-1 ratio. And fuel convoys was one of the most deadliest places to be during that theater. There was a lot of IED, roadside attacks, etc. And so I had been thinking about energy in terms of logistics and operations, and more as a substrate for the global economy. I'd argue that energy is the global economy, that those are synonymous. A lot of times it's treated as a sector, but I think that's maybe the other way around in terms of how to look at that and think about that. So at any rate, so I was thinking about that and then thinking about sort of what I wanted to do with the rest of my career because I sort of was on a leadership track there and probably could have, still been working in the US government. It was good work. I liked it. But then knew I wanted to do something different. And to your point, at the time, I think mostly sustainability wasn't a popular word. There was a sort of growing area of corporate social responsibility. And so that was, a thing. And I remember doing my MBA, taking a class on corporate social responsibility. It was sort of a new area. And I'm like, I think this is what I want. But my thought was more around the bigger picture of energy as a driver for growth and innovation in the economy. And I knew that was closely linked to climate for obvious reasons that probably not sort of wouldn't be a surprise to this audience. And then thinking about what does that global energy reset or transition look like. So that was the driver for my PhD, and I ended up doing a PhD focused on solar and for a lot of the academic work that I'd done and papers that I'd published, and then jobs that I took since then in terms of working for some larger companies, first in consulting for Boston Consulting Group, then for AWS and Amazon, and then now for Prologis. That was, really that are really big drivers in sort of that nexus on how energy powers the global economy. And in this case, where I'm working now, that is played out in logistics real estate. And I think with Prologis, I'll say one more thing. We have 1.3 billion square feet of logistics real estate, just to give you guys a size of scale. In American football fields, which I think is about roughly similar to a soccer pitch or an international football pitch, it's a little over 22,000 football fields worth of real estate. So quite a large area over 20 countries. Another way to think about this is about 3% of global GDP flows through a Prologis warehouse at some point. If you take
Wow.
services out of that, the service sector out of the economy, and just look just at goods, that jumps to probably about 10%. So, the opportunity for impact, and then also our customers are some of the largest companies in the world, like Amazon and Walmart and Maersk and Starbucks, et cetera. So it gives me an opportunity, I think, to what I hope is to make an impact, like in the things that we're doing in terms of how that
Yeah.
impacts the global economy and the energy
Well,
transition.
well, you certainly do. Thank you for sharing a little bit. I think it's important that people know who they're talking to and why you're such an expert. And
No, thank you.
it allows us to kind of dive in and And those in attendance now, you know why every time I talk to Wes, I think of a new topic for another conversation between us. So thank you for sharing. This is awesome. Let's just dive in. So again, the
Yeah.
main themes for today was we want to think about moving from ESG reporting to real supply chain decarbonization, right? Combining physical infrastructures with data and supplier engagement, right? All the way through that value chain, embedding sustainability into operational decision making, maximizing the multitude of opportunities that companies have once they have that knowledge and insight. So
Yeah.
that's what we're going to do. So let's dig in. And from your perspective, let's highlight, where CO2 emissions, actually sit, right? From where you guys are doing and the role you're
Yeah.
playing. And then
Yeah.
also perhaps you can share the role that Prologis plays in their clients, scope three as
Yep.
well. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, for sure. So for us, it's one of those things that it's kind of simple, but definitely not easy. So I'll put it that way. E- Prologis, like many companies, is heavily weighted in terms of emissions on scope three. I think your audience probably understands scope one, two, and three, but the sort of really simple way I like to explain it is if you burn it in something you own, so if it's a fuel in a vehicle you own, if it's methane or natural gas you're burning to heat a property that you own, your operational control, that's scope one. If it's within your operational control, but it's coming from something you plug in, and then the emissions associated with that electricity, it's scope two. Everything else in your value chain is scope three. So, like a lot of companies, we're heavily weighted to scope three. In fact, in our last report, it's 99% is scope three. Among that, 70% is what's known as category 13 within scope 3. That's not important what that is, but basically it's the power consumed by our tenants that we call customers, right? So we don't operate the buildings that we own typically, right? The tenants that come in, those customers come in and they have the businesses that they're operating with inside our buildings. They consume a lot of power. They also consume other things like they could consume natural gas, they could consume other things in those operations. But that power they consume, that makes up, again, 70% of our emissions. The other, most of the rest of that is split between a couple categories of embodied carbon. So that's when you have a product or input material that is part of your business and your operations. This is category one. It's called your upstream supply chain is another way to think about this. To extract raw materials, to package, to transport, to ship, to manufacture, whatever that takes to get that product to you. If those inputs for the energy inputs are fossil fuel inputs, then those emissions are associated with that, and we call it embodied carbon. That embodied carbon for us is primarily concrete, steel, and to a lesser extent, aluminum. Because again, what we do is we build warehouses, right? So there's
Yep.
massive concrete pads. If we have sites that are over 1 million square feet, so that's 1 million square feet plus of concrete, and then a lot of steel for that, and then some other materials. So those construction materials make up the bulk of the rest of our carbon footprint. So if you go back to that first category and you say, okay, you have most of your emissions or the power consumed by your tenants, by these customers. They typically, like a lot of these bigger companies that I mentioned that we report out on that are major customers for Prologis, they have very public, very bold sustainability commitments and decarbonization commitments. And we say, okay, great. So they're probably have a strong appetite for decarbonizing their operations as well, right? You can look at that as sort of an obligation or like, well, we have to go clean this up, whether you're enthusiastic or begrudgingly go do that, right? So that's maybe the first step. Maybe the first step is maybe the zero is you do nothing. Maybe then you begrudgingly address it, or maybe you enthusiastically address it, right? The next step, I think, is to say, hey, I think this is a business opportunity. And if you look at particularly with our founder and former CEO and now chair, Hamid Moghadam, who founded Prologis, he's always had this philosophy about how to operate the business. A lot of logistics real estate companies, especially historically, was just like, hey, we rented you the building. There's something called a triple net lease, which means basically that the customer sort of controls and operates everything inside the building. Pay your rent on time, lock up when you leave, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he had a different view. He said, well, wait a minute. Let's not think of them as tenants who are just paying rent. They're customers. They have businesses. What are they doing in those businesses? Well, a lot of them are massive retailers. Some of them are big logistics companies. Some of them are big product companies or CPGs, et cetera. Okay, great. What can we do that would help them with their business? Are there other ways that we can be a better business partner to them? So this is still before we get to some of the solar and energy businesses that we have. So
Mhm.
there's a group called Operations Essentials. They're like a sort of sister team to us that they do things like they sell racking or LED lighting or forklifts or move in move out services. So all those things that wouldn't be part of interfere with what those customers are doing, but those are things that they need, and we sort of have economies of scale and we operate in the space so we can help with that. So then you think and say, okay, now, like if you look at the solar business as an example that Prologis has, it starts to make more sense because you say, well, you have 1.3 billion square feet of rooftop space. Have you fully optimized that?
Mhm.
Right? And you have a customer that's just underneath that roof that's saying, hey, I need clean energy because I need to decarbonize my operations. I have big commitments for net zero by 2040 or some other date or other clean energy commitments. And say, okay, great, that's a business opportunity. So we do origination, development, execution. So the full stack for that on our own properties, and for solar, we actually do it on other warehouses as well. And then you start to look at other businesses that are within the sort of energy solutions bucket. And you say, okay, a lot of customers are electrifying their fleets, either last mile
Mhm.
delivery fleets or middle mile intermodal trucking with Class 8 vehicles, or as they're known in the US, semi trucks. Great. Those need to be charged. There's also battery storage, right? Because they need backup power, or they're in time of use markets where they can have some opportunities for cost savings for arbitrage. As you see the sort of uptake in I guess popularity or in term not popularity, what's the right way to put that? This massive surge of demand for power, particularly in the US and some other countries, for data centers, right?
Yeah.
And then thinking about how you do interoperability and how you're still getting interconnect and how you're getting load growth. Because, if you think about 40, 50, 60 years ago and you have a warehouse, it's got some lights, it's not consuming a lot of power, maybe there's some HVAC in there for offices, but it's a typical small load. But now, the warehouse of the future is fully automated, filled to the brim with robots, and they're charging trucks, and they're right. That's a huge electricity draw, more so than
Yes.
past days. So it's a very different operation, and now that you become a platform for power, right? So then all these energy solutions that we've developed, right? It sort of makes sense in that context where it's like, hey, there's a business opportunity here. And again, so if it's inside the fence or public charging hubs, we'll do origination, development, execution on that. Battery storage is the same way. And then more recently, we've been looking at other on-premise power solutions like non-combustive gas to electricity, or other ways where we're saying, hey, we could do bridge power or backup power. Again, because that power becomes your biggest limiting factor. The last thing I'll say, I mentioned Hamid before, so he stepped down at the end of last year. His is the last one I saw, at least. I don't know if it was his last ever TV appearance, or probably not, maybe to date. He was on the Jim Cramer show. So if you live in the United States, that's the Mad Money guy, or used to be. I don't know if he still uses that name, the stock guy. He interviews a lot of CEOs and sort of senior business leaders. And Hamid had said, it used to be location, location, location. That was the real estate business. It still is to some extent. But now it's becoming location, location power, right?
Mhm.
Because it's not just about, we own all those properties that we own are within urban metros, but they also the key to being able to operate is you need power. And
Yeah.
increasingly you need more and more and more on a grid that's getting more and more demand from everything else as well, right? So,
Yeah.
and I think that trend's not going to slow down. And so then
No,
again, you look and say that's how we offer those services. And then, sorry, I realize I'll answer one last part of your question, then I'll try to be more
it's
succinct for
okay.
the
You
next
keep
question.
going, buddy.
Yeah. If you look at like how that plays out across the sort of the scope one, two, and three, right? Typically what's happening is for our customers that mostly this is their scope two, particularly if it's just like, hey, we're going to do solar. You're consuming that power from the grid right now. That
Mhm.
grid to generate that electricity is some mix of probably the grid has renewables, but it also may have some coal, it may have some gas, it may have other things, it may have nuclear. Whatever the emission mix of that is, you're replacing that with that on-site solar, and you're becoming more resilient and generating power where your operations are. So that's a scope two reduction, just straight reduction. If you start to look at some of the EV charging and other things, you also are helping customers sometimes convert from scope one to scope two because they're
Mhm.
taking what would be sort of powered by diesel in terms of a truck, and now that's powered with electricity. So that already is converting to scope two, which has a much lower carbon footprint. Even in a fully fossil grid, just the physics, it's going to have a much lower carbon footprint. And then on top of that, like utilities typically have some mix of clean energy, and so you're getting even lower carbon footprint. And then there's other, it could be on-site solar, they could be looking at off-site PPAs or other things in order to reduce and eliminate those emissions further. And again, like it gives you operational reach, but then also you're getting those emission reductions. And I think that's the key part to your question, right? You can
Yeah.
look and say, hey, we have a really good handle on sort of where all these emissions sit and where everything lies. And you're like, well, gee, like that's it's a lot. It's very complicated, right? Like that's always sort of the first reaction. And then you think about like, well, hey, can these different groups, components, suppliers, partners, they need to start reducing carbon somehow. And you're like, right, but what steps can you take? And what sort of new business relationships can you find where you start to see like what are the opportunities for reducing carbon, still driving operational impact, ideally driving cost savings, and then just improving the ability for you and your business partners to operate.
Yeah.
And if you can
No,
do
that's
that,
awesome.
it's hard,
Yeah.
that's a win, right?
You guys play such a big role, right? Any type of logistics, if you're moving the goods or storing the goods or a combination, right? Logistics is a massive part of someone's, you know, carbon output. And because of your footprint and how big you guys are, you guys have to constantly think about ways to decarbonize and hit your goals. And you have this
Right.
symbiotic relationship with your customers and because of some of the things you do and then some of the infrastructure layers and solutions you guys can offer your clients. Now it allows them to decarbonize as well, so it's a win-win, right? Because you guys are so heavily linked. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty fascinating that you guys are doing it by being proactive and looking ahead, right? Not just being transactional or reactive, you're being strategic. And that's really cool. And again, I think we talked about this the other day. Your clients don't need to do everything all at once, but much like a good sustainability program, you don't do everything all at once anyway. You just get started
Correct.
and then where am I at? And then you start to make improvements and adjustments, and year over year, you're getting better and better and better. And then you're going to have a better, probability of hitting your goals. And then Prologis, not even as a partner, just Prologis, you guys are getting better and better, so you're going to hit your goals as well, and then everyone gets elevated in that role. So thank you for sharing that. I know that was a big one. Hopefully that got some people thinking. So pivoting off of that, maybe we drill down onto the scope three side of things, like data and the supplier gap. What are some of the challenges that you're seeing? With regard to your clients and needing data and the gaps that normally are there, and then some of the things you guys are doing to help close those gaps.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the keys to making that work, right? Like as you're doing those activities and you want to see how those carbon abatements flow and making sure they're properly accounted for so that everyone can report those in their respective ESG reports. The data sharing and interoperability is really important. For us, a lot of times what that looks like is when you have an on-site, particularly for solar, I'll talk about that because I think it's probably the most relevant example here. You have a system that's generating clean electrons on the top of the warehouse, right? You say, well, Prologis owns that building, so we would go and install the solar with the solar team that we have. But the customer has to agree to the offtake, where they're
Mhm.
saying, yes, we will consume the electrons that are generated from that system. And this is all predetermined, right? Like we work out how to build the system and how much energy the customer's consuming currently, et cetera. But then the way it works for solar is there's a accounting mechanism for the claims of that abatement for the carbon-free energy that you're using. And in solar and well, and actually in other renewable energy too, it's called a renewable energy certificate in the US, RECs, which is a form of an energy attribution certificate. There are others in the EU, they're called GOOs, IRECs, and some other parts of the world, and there's a couple different ways to do it, but it's essentially kind of the same type of mechanism. Once those, even for you say, wow, you don't need those, right? Because the system's just on site and then the user's just consuming that. But you do actually, because you need to verify how much electrons, how much energy that system generated,
Mm,
and that it was consumed by that person, and that there was a rec generated from that, and that that rec was retired on that site, so that you can say, yes, at this address, that's where the decarbonization happened, essentially. The reason that's important is because for those customers, it's their scope two claim, right? Because remember, if you plug it in and essentially they're still plugging it in, it's just some of the what they plug in comes from the solar system instead of from the grid. But from the customer's perspective, it's the same. They plug it in, they get some kind of power, it powers an operation. They want that to be as clean as possible. So they say, okay, great. We need that REC retirement. There's something called a REC registry and retirement registry. And then we'll make that claim for scope two.
mm,
Us, given that 70% of our carbon emissions, again on the needs to report, is scope three, we also need to make the same claim. Now, we're not double counting because, again, it's the
yep.
same building, same consumption. We're the value chain partner, we're the scope three partner. For them, it's scope two. And then there's a process for that, and you have an open rec registry, and then both ESG teams can then say, we can point to that and say, yep, that's where the claim was. It gets a little more complicated for if you think about some of the like downstream customers for say like a logistics company that we'd be working with. So say like a or a shipping company or a 3PL. So if you look at like a Maersk or CEVA or DSV or any of these
Mhm.
big logistics companies, right? They are all B2B players. I don't think they sell anything direct to consumer. I could be wrong about that. But a lot of times, like even some of our customers will share customers with them, or maybe a big retailer or someone else. They're sort of supporting that. So a little more complicated example. I won't walk through the whole thing, but let's say we use like one of our mobility solutions, right? We're helping electrify either last mile delivery or middle mile is probably more interesting. So intermodal transport. Well, now that's reducing their scope one claims, but then someone else is having a scope three claim on that because they're getting a delivered product or service. And
Yep.
now that product or service is coming with less carbon emissions, right? So great, great for them. We don't see that hitting our scope three, but we know that has downstream benefits as well for their customers, right? For our customers' customers. All of those things, need a way to be able to be tracked by the respective parties and to have it accredited and to have those ESG claims that come out in voluntary reporting, that everybody sort of has a paper trail, the way I call it, right? And again, those can get complex in terms of those networks. But the good thing is, particularly when you're talking about scope three, is while the stack is quite large because a value chain has many layers or many tiers, right? And you say, wow, that's so complicated. How could we ever sort of manage all these things at multiple tiers of things we don't directly touch or we indirectly touch? Complicated for sure, right? But the thing I always like is when you have some type of abatement that happens, you deliver the same or better end use energy service, right? You move a truck, you deliver a good, you manufacture a good, whatever that is. Everybody in that value chain gets to benefit from that, right? Everybody gets to make
100%.
that reduction claim where they're like, yeah, this whole value stack got better. And then you start to look and you say, when you have good like diagnostic tools and software and different things that can help you understand where all that is, a lot of times I think even for people in sustainability, but I think especially business leaders that are just sort of adjacent to it, they look at that and say, well, this seems overwhelming. There's so much. How could we possibly clean all this up? Right. And again, that comes
Yep.
back to the framing that I talked about in the beginning. Um, but if you look at that again and you say, hey, this is your map of business opportunity. Because we know just by pure economics and pure physics, right? The cheapest way to power anything is from a fuel source that has zero marginal cost, right? So the
Yep.
wind is free. The photons from the sun are free. Now there's equipment, and we're in that business,
Yes.
so I'm not I'm not ignorant of what it costs to install that. But then the fuel cost is free, right?
Yes. Yes.
So as you're starting to move into that sort of electrotech state, you're getting more and more operationally efficient, which is cost savings and then somebody's revenue, right? And you're able to drive more revenue or deliver the same good or service. So again, you look at that map when you can start to work with partners that can help you with that and say, ah, these are all the places where I have waste in my value system somewhere. And every opportunity I have, every program we launch, like to your point, Colin, where you're like, hey, look, just get started somewhere. Pick what your favorite thing is. If it's low-hanging fruit, if it's maybe you want to do the biggest challenge first, whatever that is, fine. You pick that as your strategy. But now you know where all your opportunities are. And again,
Mm.
if you start thinking about it that way, it's a very different mindset. Because now then you do some things, you go back and you say, great, where's the next opportunity? Where can we get additional cost savings? Where can we get additional efficiency? Where can we maybe, in the case of Prologis' history, right, find a place to open a new business line? And it really starts to flip like how you think about that. And as sustainability professionals, it's on us to paint that framework, right or wrong. And you kind of pointed this out before, even in my own personal history. I think it's indicative of the narrative for the longest time around sustainability, around Earth Day, around green, around whatever has been, hey, these are bad things and we're morally wrong for doing these and we have to clean it up. Again, those things are, I think, are largely true. That's fine. But again, it's about how you frame that and think about that. Like, let's start thinking about that as these are business opportunities to drive greater efficiency, to drive greater growth, to drive more efficient growth. And
Mm.
for us, that's our job now. If you're listening to this webinar, either real time or if you listen to it later, that's now your job. Actually, that's always been your job if you didn't know it. Your job is to go and translate that for the business. Use tools that will help you with that. But that
Yep.
narrative you put around it is these are where your business opportunities are. Because the people that you're working with, you can't blame them if they don't see it that way off the bat. For one, it's not
Yes.
their area. That's not where their passion and where their work is, like the people listening to this webinar. And two, they've heard probably for decades that this is just some kind of bad thing that it's, that we have to clean up. It's a moral obligation, et cetera. And again, that's not wrong per se, but it's your job to say, hey, let's think about this differently.
Sure. No, that makes sense. Having like a different attitude about it, really.
Yeah,
It's not like something that you're being punished to do. It's just an opportunity to do something better, right? Become more
exactly. Yeah.
efficient. And, I really like how you guys are, you're so involved with so many layers and what you do and how you impact different people throughout that entire value chain. But you guys are coming up with innovative ways. You're trying to maybe centralize systems, certainly giving better visibility, end to end, anything you guys are involved in. And then you just kind of reiterated the absolute importance, the must have about having, continuous, reliable, actionable data. If you guys
Yeah.
have that, going back to the recs, right? Those recs, lots of different people need to be able to see it and validate it for different reasons at different times.
That's right.
So if you don't have that visibility, if you don't have that data, then it's just a mess. And now it
Yeah.
doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be in trouble. It doesn't mean you necessarily can't prove the validation of, but the validity of it. But it can be done a lot faster, more efficiently if you have a process in place, if you've been proactively thinking about it, planning it, and then you have the data subsets that can be shared to whoever needs that at the time. So pretty awesome stuff. So,
Yeah.
insights into action. I mean, obviously, you guys are all about that, and I think you've touched on it a little bit.
Yeah.
Is there something particular you want to share? You want to dive into, about what you guys are doing and the role you're playing, where we people can become more action oriented? Because I know that's something you and I have talked about
Yeah.
several times. We're just tired of people planning and thinking about the
Yeah.
future.
Yeah.
Let's just do something now. Just make a small improvement this year, and then that now you have momentum. So.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mentioned that we solar was sort of the first energy solutions business that we started, and then we have storage. We set a goal, I think what was it, 4 or 5 years ago, to hit 1 gigawatt within 5 years. We announced at the beginning of this year that we hit that goal, and now we're at 1.3 gigawatts of on-site solar and
Congratulations.
storage deployed.
That's for
Yeah, so we're very proud of it.
all your properties.
All the
That's the output.
properties worldwide,
That's a,
split it, yeah, spread
oh,
across.
fantastic.
And in the U.S., we're the number two commercial and industrial scale, so so on-site commercial scale solar installer. So we've been at that for a few years, right? And sort of we do that full stack around origination, development, and execution. And I'm super optimistic about, we just announced that we had passed 1 gigawatt at the beginning of the year. We're now already at 1.3. We see a lot of growth in that area. We see too that this is going to continue, not just solar, but our on-prem energy solutions, our mobility, electrification, the other stuff that we're working on too on the R&D side. We see this will continue to play an outsized role. Again, I know I talked about it a bit, but I'll come back to it. The relationship with real estate, particularly commercial real estate, and how you think of the grid, it's just changing. And we're sort of at I think, a historic time for that. Most of the time, for any type of node at the end of the electricity, the power grid was very similar, whether it was your house or commercial, et cetera. And this will probably not sound too alien, where you're like, hey, look, I just consume. The power just comes in, like it's a
Sure.
funnel, and I consume it, and there's energy services that I use that for, right? But I got a
Well, for
meter.
most people, that's true. So yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're like, I could consume less and the meter will run slower. And if I consume more, the meter will run faster. And the price is what it is in most places, in most regulated markets. Again, that's changing now. And you could say the same is happening for residential solar as well. I don't work in that space, right? But you have solar, you have batteries, and now I've heard a lot of people in the residential space talk about the way they even position that is actually their battery first sellers, and then they use solar to fill up the battery, right?
Mhm.
The relationship is changing now, on the commercial side where I work, very much so, because you're still consuming from the grid, to be clear, more than ever, right? Because again, the electricity growth is huge in terms of automation and sophistication in those warehouses. You're electrifying your transport, but also that is now a platform for power, right? You can generate on site at the rooftop. You can generate on site at the parking lot. You can generate and a time shift with storage. We have a front of the meter storage business as well, so you get sort of additional opportunities there. This is just a much more complex, but I think in a good way, ecosystem that we're now operating in. And so, the point we talked about you need a good paper trail, right? For lack of a better word, you need a good way to track and monitor that data and make use of it. I think goes just hand in hand with that. We have a digital solutions business internally as well, where we're looking at like you have to have that digital, that data, that knowledge layer because it's great that there's all these opportunities. It's very different. It's everything's in the mix. Everybody's generating and consuming at the same time across multiple different assets. But now, like those information flows become critical. Again, not just for your reporting, to the point you made earlier, Colin. Although that's still really important. You got to find a way to make sure we're keeping account properly.
Yeah.
But also because that starts to elevate where are those opportunities, and they might be in areas that you didn't realize, right, or that weren't intuitively obvious at first. When you have that information layer, like you start to be able to see that in this space that's getting more and more complex. And if you're hearing this and you're like, oh, that sounds scary, right? It's probably a little bit for all of us. That's fine. But you should also get somewhat of a feeling of like, that sounds exciting too. There's a lot of opportunity in this space that we just wouldn't have had, 30, 40 years ago if we were doing this, right? And now we're in a time where we do. And is there a perfect solution for that right now? No, but we get to figure that out. That's really exciting. So,
So great answer. And while you were speaking, a question came in,
oh yeah.
it's how would you recommend identifying opportunities if you don't currently have great data?
Yeah. So I don't think that's a chicken and egg question, I'll say first, right?
Okay.
Your data will never be perfect. So just accept that to begin with, right? Make it good, not for the sake of some idealized state of perfect data, but do your best on sort of gathering and making sense of that data layer because it tells you where your first opportunities are. And
Mhm.
if your data that you're collecting are getting to the point where you're starting to see opportunities, because again, you see sort of emissions and supply chains, you see opportunities for partnerships, you see opportunities for on-site energy like we do, or if you're a customer of ours, for sure, like I'm happy to talk to you about that. But it's that, and it's not a good enough either. It's that should be the goal. You should be trying to get more data and better data because it's going to unlock more opportunities for you. And when you start to see those opportunities unlock, that should be your catalyst to be like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, do we have the full picture? Again, if your framing is, well, gee, there's so much, it's complicated, and we just got to get a handle on this, and it's crazy, and I want to make sense of the world. That's fine. I get that because there's sort of, it satisfies like a anxiety that you might have. But you should start to look at like, I want to gather and process enough data to where I can start seeing opportunities. And when you think of it that way, you won't see this as some giant burden. You'll see this as some giant
Yeah.
opportunity space.
Yeah.
And so then again, you get started. The other thing I'll say too is some stuff is pretty intuitive, right? Like you have some data already. Like everyone has a power bill, as an example. You can do a quick, Perplexity or Google search and figure out like what the emissions mix is, the emission factor is for that. So right now you have a useful, very actionable data point, right? Is that comprehensive? Is that enough for your ESG reports? No. But again, like that's a great place where you already have data you could get started. There's lots
Yeah.
of others, right?
Yeah.
But I also wouldn't let the gathering and the processing of that data, don't let that slow you down. I saw that a lot, particularly in the scope 3 space over the years, where it was like, well, we just don't have good
100%.
data. We just don't have good
Yeah.
data. And
Yeah.
it's like, look, we can't, guys, we can't throw up our hands and say, like, well, we're not going to do anything because the data is not in some perfect idealized state. It'd be like, do you have actionable data? And it's like,
Yeah.
I almost guarantee that you do.
Yeah.
Now, could it be better? Yes, because it could be more actionable, right? But if you flip your mindset on that, then that helps
Yeah.
get you started.
Well, no, that answer actually, it's a great answer, and it dovetails perfectly into one of the things we had discussed in a previous conversation about the importance of having both focusing on both quick wins, easy wins, as well as
Yeah,
long-term transformational goal, doing
that's right.
both. And it just like your last statement, don't just throw your hands up in there and say, "Well, I don't know where to begin, so I'm going to do nothing." No,
No,
just
yeah, don't do
to
that.
find
Yeah,
find something that you can start that just starts to build a baseline. It starts to build some familiarity, and then it'll open up if you take it seriously. And again, I think it's the mindset of these are opportunities for us to get better, but they're real business opportunities to make improvements as well. It's not just, oh, here's something I have to do, or I don't really fully buy into it. Well, okay. So let's see. Another question looks like it
I'll
came
do a
in.
quick metaphor
Yeah.
before you do the next question.
No, no,
This will be
fine.
a bit bombastic, but to drive it home. Imagine if someone told you you have 20 piles of gold. You don't know exactly how much is in each pile. And you're like, wow, that's awful. It's going to take so long for me to figure out like how much is in each pile and whatever, right? And you're like, I, sure, yes, I guess that is a problem, right? But it's
Good
like,
problem to
go get started, right? You have piles of gold right now.
have.
Count
That's
the first
true.
pile. Just start there,
Yeah.
and then figure out what you can do next.
It is a good metaphor because it really truly is. It's a business ROI opportunity that is sitting there,
100%. Yeah,
and it's not gonna go away, the sustainability goal. It's gonna change and evolve, and it's gonna look differently 20 years from now, but it's not just going away. So
that's correct.
embrace it, dive into it. And again, get better partners, have short-term and long-term strategies, get transformational technology to start accessing, getting visibility to the things that matter, get that data, get access to it, make it actionable, and you'd be surprised how easy it is to really truly get started, right?
Yep.
So here's one more question, and then I know we're up against time, and maybe we could wrap it up with some closing thoughts and some wisdom from you. But it says, how would you focus your efforts if you're a small team? One of the things I'm seeing and hearing a lot out there is there's 1 and 2 person teams that are managing these massive, objectives.
Yeah.
But I think you see it a lot too, so maybe you could just kind of
Yeah, as
touch
I
on
say,
that.
that's the first place I want to start. If you're on a small team tasked with overwhelming amounts of work and a lack of resources, welcome to the sustainability industry, right? That may make you feel bad or good depending on like how you took
Well, you're
that
not
statement.
alone.
Okay.
Welcome.
You're not alone. Yeah, yeah, 100% you're not alone. This is absolutely, I think, you hear this story over and over and over again, right? There are some companies that have larger sustainability teams, and I think we certainly do at Prologis. But even then, like the scale of sort of what you're trying to tackle is always bigger than the resourcing or the time that you'll have. So get comfortable in discomfort. That's the first one. That's more counseling, I think, than probably a good sort of critical business answer, right? And then once you accept that, then you start again. I kind of have hit this a lot, but I'll say it again. You have to have that opportunity mindset because if you have this task burden mindset, you will burn out. And I've seen it.
Sure.
I've seen really good friends burn out, like on a personal note, like good, really smart, really hardworking people. And usually, the smarter and the more hardworking they are, the more intense the burnout can be. If they're trying to say like, "Hey, I'm trying to do everything, and I'm going to make figure out a way to do it all with no resources or whatever they've been allotted." The way I think you have a career and a life and sort of something to help make sense of this is you flip into that opportunity mindset. You figure out, Colin, you made this point before. You're like, what can you affect right now? If you've seen, this wasn't my favorite movie, but there was a line from it that I really liked. One of the Justice League movies, I can't remember where they were all there. Superman and Wonder Woman and the Flash and Batman was there. And what was the guy's name? The villain, I can't remember his name, but they were fighting, and the Flash started having a panic attack. Basically, he was freaking out because he was like, "There's
Mm,
people dying all around. There's stuff going on, or whatever." And Batman tells him, he was like, "You save one person." He was like,
yeah.
"You find one person and save them. You focus on
Mm,
nothing else." But he
mm.
was the Flash, so once he did that, he went to the next person and the next person
That's
and the
it.
next
One at
person,
a time.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so when you're in this situation, right, where you have a small team, overwhelming stuff, find like where I don't like saying quick wins or low-hanging fruit per se, because oftentimes it's not quick and it's not easy. But again, focus on that first
Sure.
actionable goal, right, that you can
Yeah.
achieve.
Yeah.
And then as you start to deliver that success and as you start to show and demonstrate to the business, like I'm making an impact and a difference towards our business goals. And again, you get that
Sure.
framing right. You hopefully at that point can either unlock more resources. You're going to get better at this. You're going to get more efficient. Your team's going to get better at this and more efficient, more skilled. You'll bring on partners. You'll bring on tools. You'll find other ways to sort of. I know people talk a lot about like leverage AI, leverage tools. Absolutely, like there's great tools coming online, et cetera, and you'll be able to start advancing and making more gains. But again, the spoiler is you probably won't be able to do it all. There will be
Yeah.
things that you won't be able to get to, and then you put them on the list maybe for next year or next cycle, whatever that is. But focus on those wins first.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, just focus on one thing now at least you're started. Because once you're on the path, you have momentum and it can continue to build and then, you'll start to check some boxes and then you're a little bit more energized to go on to the next
That's
thing. And
right.
and again, as you go through space and time, you're going to learn more, you're going to take on new partners, you're going to add some awesome sustainability climate tech like what Breathe Zero offers people and there's some other stuff out there for doing different specialty things and away you go. So that's perfect. So thank you. We'll use that as your final takeaway.
There you go.
I
I love it. Yeah.
know Wes and Prologis would love to hear from people if you guys have questions about warehousing and logistics and things like that.
Yeah.
Obviously, the Breathe Zero team would love to hear from you as well, answer questions. We really just want to invite you to be part of the greater community we're putting together. Check us out at breathezero.ai. We're just kind of building out an ongoing, continuous global conversation with people in the space, lots of different areas of focus and walks of life. It's just to continue to talk about things that are happening because the more we talk, The more questions we'll field, the more questions we field, then the more answers we'll find. And that will help people to get on their way. And then you won't be overwhelmed like the Flash, and you'll just focus on saving one thing in your value chain and then on to the
There you go.
next. And yeah, so if there's a QR code on the screen you can scan. We'll get you a copy of this recording once we have it all doctored up. And yeah, so that's it. Thank you, Wes. We appreciate it. I learned a lot as always. I think it's a great conversation, and obviously, I think this just opens up the door for another conversation, in the not too distant future. We could dive a little deeper, or maybe we'll even have some success stories from some of the people you guys have worked with over the years and how they started on like a saving one person right now, and now they're several years into their journey and they've got a whole village of people they saved. So thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll talk soon. Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Yep, bye.